how to organize your managed services taxonomy and excel in key categories, and the biggest zero trust architecture gaps you need to fill. That and the latest news and trends in the managed security space coming right up on Cyber for Hire.
Building bridges between managed security providers and their clients, it's the podcast where MSPs, vCISOs, and end users take a united stand against cybercrime. This is Cyber for Hire.
All right, welcome friends to episode number 16 of Cyber for Hire. How's everybody doing today? I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media in New York. And joining me today on the other side of the Continental Divide in Utah is my co-host and partner in cybercrime, Ryan Morris, principal consultant with Morris Management Partners. Ryan, you may have noticed that I was absent last week. I would hope you would notice, because otherwise that would be weird.
We did notice, but we were hoping that it was because you were having fun and not just doing more work.
I was indeed having fun. In fact, allow me just a minute or so to indulge and let everyone know. I was vacationing in Iceland, taking in all the amazing sights around that country of fire and ice, and doing it all, the thermal baths, the ice caving, lava fields, the works. Now, I could take up a whole episode just talking about that, but I won't. You'll be thankful to know. I will say two things. One, it was nice for 10 days that whenever I heard someone talk about trolls, that it wasn't the computer kind, for once. And second, if I had to sum up the entire tour in one picture, Ryan, it would be this one right here that I'm sharing with you on screen. Take a gander. I want to hear your impressions.
Yeah, the impressions, the Aurora Borealis. Right now, again, I've seen these things on television, never in person. They're always more impressive, these sorts of things, when you're actually there.
Absolutely. So that was me standing in front of a planetarium projection of the Northern Lights, not the actual. Now, I actually did take some Northern Lights pictures. They were cool, but much less impressive than that. Here's a photo of the actual Northern Lights that I saw, which I could not see through the naked eye, but rather through my camera only. Some nice, subtle greens and reds, just not quite as amazing as the first photo.
See, scientists have the best cameras.
So anyway, I would say searching for the Aurora Borealis, a little bit like how a CISO conducts threat hunting and detection. It helps to know what you're looking for, the conditions under which to find it. Luck has to be on your side, and someone may very well be waking you up at midnight to say, hey, get up, you need to see this right now.
Excellent life conclusion.
All right. Well, anyway, that's that for my trip to Iceland. Plenty to cover today, as always, but some news is just so important it can't wait, which is why we want to share with everyone what's top of mind today. So here's your headline. After analyzing the response to 140 software vulnerabilities, BitSight revealed in a new research report that the cybersecurity vulnerability remediation rate for more than 100,000 organizations around the world was a paltry 5%. The report said that this ongoing struggle to conduct proper asset management, identify key vulnerability risks, and then patch them is due to an increased attack surface that continues to grow as the result of investments in cloud infrastructure, proliferation of internet-connected devices, heavy reliance on third-party vendors, and the growth of the remote workforce. So keeping in mind that BitSight is a cyber risk analytics and security ratings company, so their perspectives should be looked at through that lens, the company suggests that organizations can improve their vulnerability remediation rates by prioritizing and investing in vulnerability management, seeking better attack surface visibility, and gaining a better understanding of third-party risks. So Ryan, why is this top of mind for you today?
See, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, we might be able to record a soundbite somewhere in our program and play it again on a frequent basis. Remember to begin with the fundamentals. Let's do the basic things right, and then we can work on edge cases and look for the exciting things that are happening in the bleeding edge of cybersecurity. The fact that their numbers indicate a patch rate of less than 5%, that's there's grading on a curve, and then there's the teacher just giving up and going home and saying, I probably should find a new career because if 95% of my students can't pass the final exam, then I clearly did not accomplish my stated objective. I think this is a call to arms. This is a very urgent time in our industry as technologies get better on both the offensive and the defensive side, as we get better access to alerts and the flow of information, and as we're supplemented by artificial intelligence. There's a ton of positive news in cybersecurity technology. But if you are not actually using those tools correctly, it kind of doesn't matter how good the software is, right? My philosophy is software will never solve the problem of cybersecurity. It is only dedicated professionals with conscientious best practice following that use this software that will ever make a difference. So the research tends to back us up, but if I'm an MSSP and I'm looking for a reason to call a prospect who's in my pipeline and just hasn't felt the urgency yet to say yes and sign that contract for my services, this might be headline number one, and we might use this to get back in front of every single person and say, on a scale of 1 to 5%, how good are you at actually protecting your systems? Tons of upside to be gained. That's why we do what we do for a living.
All right. Well, Ryan, your perspective on this is as illuminating as the Northern Lights, I would say.
Very colorful.
And we do want to hear your opinion as well, speaking to the viewers here. So if you have anything to say about this or anything else for that matter in the realm of cybersecurity and managed services, then please write to us at cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com. Anyway, that's our top of mind hot take for the day. More later in the show. But first, it's time for our featured MSSP industry and market strategy topic of the week, presenting our big idea. In business, how to organize your managed services taxonomy and excel in key categories. Having a clear and cogent taxonomy that classifies your managed cyber services into distinct buckets or categories is an important step for MSSPs looking to define and differentiate their market offerings to clients. Customers can refer to your taxonomy to better understand your scope of services and ensure that they don't leave gaps in their security plans, while you as a service provider can leverage your own taxonomy to assess your portfolio and identify future opportunities for deliverables and areas of growth. Also, in the second half of our discussion, we'll look at some recent results from assessments of managed services companies in various cyber taxonomy fields, exploring what the best performers are doing in order to excel. So we have an excellent guest today to take us through the subject matter. He's Craig Robinson, Research Vice President at IDC. His coverage areas include such security services as managed detection and response, cyber resilience, and incident readiness and response. Craig joined IDC in 2019, bringing with him 30 years of practitioner experience that he lends to his thought leadership and guidance in the managed and professional security service markets. Craig, so glad that you could join us today. Happy you're here. Let's start with this. What is the importance in your mind of having a rock-solid, well-defined taxonomy if you're a services provider? What happens if it's not well-defined and you start seeing some blurring of lines or some things that are maybe not very well categorized or defined?
Yeah, thanks. And it's kind of funny. So industry analysts, we like to use the term taxonomy. I think we've heard the term catalog. Maybe catalog might be a better way to think about it, or a menu in terms of what are the things that we need to be thinking about offering. I'm a recovering McDonald's person. I have ketchup in my blood. And, anytime you go into a McDonald's, you always see what? You see a menu. And then sometimes in that menu, it might actually just describe, what actually is on it. Big Mac is 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. I'm aging myself, but that used to be a jingle. McDonald's chose wisely never to use my singing abilities, but you kind of knew what was in it. I think MSSPs need to be able to do the same thing. They need to be able to articulate, what are their core competencies? What are they really good at? And what can they offer in that area? On the same token, that's kind of like the input, but the market's shifting. Now it's like, what are the outcomes that you can produce as a result of that? So rather than thinking about what we're ingesting, let's start thinking about, okay, if I start looking at things like managing your application development for your application security, what could that provide for me? Well, now you have options, for example, to be able to speak to the board and say our risk is reduced because now we know what's going into our software. If there's any of these, supply chain sort of attacks where we have to be concerned about the libraries that we're using, we have a handle on that because our MSSP partner has helped us to keep track of that. So start thinking about outcomes rather than necessarily the input, which blows up our entire discussion today. I know because we want to talk about taxonomies and catalogs. But as we're talking about that, I would encourage the listening audience to start thinking about how do I translate what I'm offering, which we have to do, into an outcome that we can produce for our prospects and for our clients.
See, I think that's a very smart way to look at it, Craig. And I like the way that you've organized things here. So obviously there are some real lessons to be learned, but I like to think of it as the difference between inside voice and outside voice, right? Things that we will say to each other inside the walls of our own organization versus things that we say to customers. I think the industry has done a fairly impressive job from a technical perspective of developing tools to address every single one of these elements of cybersecurity, right? We, as practitioners, we often say, there's no such thing as cybersecurity. There are layers and there are permutations and there's all this. Okay, to be able to get a definition of what all that is, that's good. But at no point has a customer ever said, you know what, I'd like to buy 3 of these and 2 of those, and then I'll take a large orange soda to go with that. That's just not the way that things get done. In your view, right, as you look into the taxonomy, right, the structure around managed security services that you guys have established, are there places in there where you see especially effective outcome translation opportunities, like things where you think, if we're talking about this, I know that I can say this in customer terms in a way that they're just going to grab onto? Are there some superstars in there that are easy to translate?
Right. Let's start off with the very, very basic. It's not even really cybersecurity related, but it ties right into it. Asset management, for example. How many times, again, your listening audience would probably be able to understand this. You go into a project or you go into an organization and the CIO or the IT director or the virtual CISO, if they have a very small company that they're dealing with, if they're lucky to have even that, even know what assets they have. If you don't know what you have, you don't know what's to protect. And what are we trying to protect? We're trying to protect data. We're trying to protect the applications. And in the case of critical industries, we're trying to protect things that might have geopolitical consequences if we're not protecting properly. So let's start with understanding what's at risk. Let's start with understanding what assets do we have, and that's difficult. MSSPs have a unique opportunity, I think, in this arena because they tend to work with similar sort of industries, similar sort of size customers. So they have a unique opportunity to be able to go in there and say, we need to look at X because we see this throughout the industry. So let's take a look at that. But asset management, and it's not even listed in my current security services taxonomy, but I think that's a really important missing piece because so often when we talk to CISOs and others, you start a major project and the first thing they're trying to understand is what is at risk? What do we actually have? And then you start deploying things like vulnerability scans and looking at what's in the infrastructure. And it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize we had this much stuff. And this whole hybrid work thing certainly hasn't helped any, because now people are working everywhere in mixed environments. So if there was a golden nugget to kind of pull out is understanding that you need to identify what's at risk and then be able to model that out to the extent that you can, so that as sales proposals and plans are being put together today, it's taking longer. I imagine, everyone's probably sitting there going, yeah, we're talking to a client, and all of a sudden a procurement department got created. It's like everyone's stepping back and looking at reductions except in purchasing, because there's extra sets of eyes that are being placed. So it's getting harder and harder to get something out. But if you can model what the threats are, if you can model what the risk is, and then apply the prescription that applies to the known issues that they have, that's going to help.
Craig, I love the idea of almost working backwards by starting with the the actual outcome that you're looking to achieve, and then really building your taxonomy of services around that. And I definitely see the value in terms of being able to take that approach to help better sell your services as an MSSP to your client base or your potential client base. In addition to that, I would think that also this particular exercise helps you, just as the MSSP itself, recognizing, again, gaps, missing pieces in some of the services that you are offering, so that if down the line you want to build out a little bit more of your services, if you're looking to challenge others in the market in certain spaces, having that taxonomy in place, and then understanding how that taxonomy actually equates to results or outcomes, that's going to be very beneficial in terms of helping you develop that market strategy.
Absolutely.
So, Craig, from your perspective, one of the things that I'm looking at is the translation between tools and offerings, right? It's one thing to resell a piece of software. Here's a license, there's a user, everything gets passed through to the end user. As a service provider, I don't resell licenses so much as I consume them to build an offering. Is it safe to say there is no one tool that does all the things that you are outlining in your managed security services? And B, is there a rational way to begin to manage our internal stack so that we can actually say this? Is there, like, as I'm looking at your taxonomy, right? You've got a category for MDR, one for managed infrastructure, one for the other managed services.
Yeah.
Is there separate tools for each of those? Do the tools cross categories? How do we start to rationalize our internal stack?
Yeah. The themes cross, but the tools don't. And here's the problem is that, and again, many of your listening audience are probably hearing and seeing the same thing as they go into some of these organizations that they're working with, CISOs or CIOs or whoever it happens to be that they're dealing with. There's a glut of tools out there. They're not connected. They don't know if they're configured correctly. They don't necessarily pull back into the SIM properly, or they're not even sure if it is. It may or may not be correlated with other pieces of information. So we need to get away from this tool-centric sort of idea. And I think we're moving that direction somewhat into a platform-based operation, hence the birth of XDR, hence the birth of MDR. And really, what is it? The idea behind the technology behind those platforms is we're going to be able to ingest data no matter where it comes from, no matter who it comes from. And I'm a big proponent of heterogeneous sort of capabilities for those specific services and platforms. And that's probably a completely separate 30-minute discussion we can dive into. But those platforms are able to ingest the signals and the telemetry and the indicators of attack to be able to say, okay, here's an alert that we need to go investigate. But if we don't have a platform that we bring that stuff into, then it's just noise everywhere. And noise is painful. False positives. How many people are talking to customers out there and they're complaining about false positives? Their team is chasing down stuff because they get a signal from one tool or from another, but there's nothing correlating it together to say, this is something that we really do need to go attack. So, for example, someone has something open, they elevated their permissions. Well, if it's someone that's in IT, or security, that would be normal. But if it's your AP clerk, that's probably not normal. But if you're not correlating that back with an identity service that says, what's the role of that person, for example, then what do you end up doing? You're chasing your tail. What happens when people in InfoSec chase tails? They get burned out. What happens when they get burned out? They start looking around. or their ears open up when the recruiter, calls every other week to see if they're willing to jump ship somewhere else. InfoSec people are one of the most highly desired people out there. IDC's got research. It's the most sought after persona out there is what? Cybersecurity people. So MSSPs need to be invested in themselves in this area as well, because they're partners in crime. And maybe that's not the appropriate term to use in a cybersecurity discussion, but the competition is taking a look at their talent as well. So, while we're always concerned about making sure our client base is not chasing after false positives, as an InfoSec community, we need to make sure we're not doing it as well, or else we're going to burn out our people. They go home and they're burned out, or they're wondering what they missed.
Craig, I like the example that you gave before of XDR. It's something that we've talked about a little bit in the past, and things also that sometimes can be a little bit tricky to define what constitutes a particular concept, like an XDR, or Ryan and I are going to be talking about zero trust a little bit later. Zero trust has become maybe a little bit better defined, but there's still a lot of debates around what's really a zero trust solution and what's not considered a zero trust solution. And so I'm wondering too the benefits of having a more concrete taxonomy to help with also, defining some of these more still a little bit vague or esoteric cyber solutions concepts, and maybe being able to help you as a managed services provider, better define some of these hazier concepts for folks.
Right. One of the things as we talk about the XDR arena or the MDR, and again, most of your audience probably already knows this, extended detection response. So XDR is really the evolution, I would argue, of EDR by ingesting different telemetry from different things beyond the endpoint. Whereas MDR wraps those services around that XDR platform, or a mixture of other tools and technologies that their customers are using. I think it's important to be able to be as heterogeneous as possible in terms of the sort of infrastructure that you support from an MDR perspective or from an XDR perspective. 4 years ago, maybe you guys disagree, but 4 years ago, pre-pandemic, a lot of MSSPs would kind of push this idea of having more of a homogeneous environment. Single stack, single platform, and that made a ton of sense, you could argue, because it reduces complexity, right? But we're in 2023 where we have, 6, 7, 8% inflation, potential recessions. No one's going to be throwing out their current technology stack. They want to reduce it, they want to simplify it, but we can't force it. So as we start moving into these platform-based solutions, MDR, XDR, someone's going to come up with another letter to stick in front of DR here soon, so that, and call that the magic bullet. And there's other ones that are good. There's CDR, cloud, and there's, I heard PDR, phishing detection and response, because so much is tied around email and messaging. These are all solutions, but in terms of team back to what you guys talked about earlier in the program, you still want to. Cybersecurity cannot turn into a check the box exercise. If we just say, well, we have an XDR platform, we're good, or we have a SIM, we're good. There's still going to be a requirement to make sure that what we have is tested, is tuned, is configured. There's still that need for that human-led threat hunting exercise to go through a client's environment and find things that the technology missed, because there's things that come through on 0 day. They wouldn't call it 0 day if there wasn't an initial day.
See, and
I probably did not answer your question at all there.
No, you did. You did. No, you absolutely did, and then gave us so much more beyond that. So that was awesome. That was great. Sorry, Ryan, go on.
No. I was just going to say, building on that, Craig, if you're looking at a strategy of platform that is organizing the way that we ingest data and then respond to all of our exercises, do you have any highlights, any good news stories about ways that people are applying your research, your taxonomy, to define the business outcomes better, to close gaps in their own offerings, and any good news that we can share with the audience?
It never seems to be good news, right? We always have to lead off every discussion with FUD, right? Fear and uncertainty and doubt. So if we're not scaring the heck out of people, they're not going to buy, right? No, I'm just kidding. That's obviously not true. But here's the good news: is I think we are moving from a reactive to a proactive sort of environment. As I'm talking to providers, we're seeing higher usage, for example, of incident response retainers. And what are they using them for? They're not just using it for the break the glass, call Batman. We need, incident response people to parachute in virtually, not in person, to fix our stuff. But they're using it for proactive services. And here's where that's really cool, is especially in the mid market. IT directors who have to handle security, or maybe a virtual CISO, they don't like to go to the CFO, for example, which many of them end up reporting to, for example, in the mid-market space, every time they want to do a tabletop or anytime they want to do, a pen test. What they like to be able to do is, here's this bucket of money, whatever that bucket of money, let's call it $100,000. And something, I'm going to reserve some of it for incident response for that break the glass moment, but I'm going to be able to take some of that and use it to up my maturity, to up my capabilities of preparing, for example, for that day where I might need incident response. So maybe I get that vaunted tabletop exercise in. So I see that as kind of a shining moment in terms of some of the research that we're seeing. The second aspect that encourages me is this idea around there's increased demand for GRC services. What does that mean? That's telling me that the market is recognizing that they need to understand their risk profiles. They need to understand better what's at risk. What do I need to do to stay compliant? Because compliance won't by itself make you safe, but I think compliance, following compliance, can open the eyes and make you aware of the sorts of hygiene that you need to be able to do. And then Mr. and Mrs. MSP, when you sneak in there, you can kind of provide that context around those sorts of things that they're starting to see, and then provide outcome-based solutions that help them to be able to speak to the stakeholders, to their supply chain partners, to the board, and say, we're up in our game. We're doing tabletop exercises. We did a red team exercise. We're looking at MDR as a solution to come in to give us that 24/7, 365 blocking and tackling coverage that we need, because we recognize, and some of this is requires some humility, but I think organizations need to look at themselves and say, is InfoSec, is cybersecurity, is that our core competence? Or are we better selling, widgets, or whatever it is you end up doing? If you are able to take an honest look in terms of your capabilities and then start pulling in people whose core competence is cybersecurity, is reducing risk, that's going to give a better outcome. That'll make me excited. So I'm not looking at, I'm still old school. I have to read the Wall Street Journal paper edition every day. I don't want to see things on that's cybersecurity related. If I see that to me, that means us as an industry, we're failing. And I don't like to fail.
And
that was a word salad, and I apologize.
Great. Now, so Craig, you gave us some of the good news now, and talked a little bit about some of the tricks of the trade, or some of the tips that organizations can do to better excel. Ryan has now forced me to be the bad guy by asking you, what about the bad news side of things? Just from your recent assessments and observations, What's maybe like your number one area of improvement that you would like to see among the various categories of services that you have recently
Yeah,
observed and researched? What would be top on your list?
yeah. Here's I don't know if this is going to answer your question, so I'm going to continue the trend of not answering what you're asking me. I'm going to approach it from a different angle. Then you can
That's
correct
it.
me.
Keep me on my
We did
toes. Do it.
Okay. Well, all right. So we'll have calisthenics post meeting to make sure that we're all on top of our game. But we did some research about 3 or 4 months ago. I may be off a month or two, where we were asking organizations, given the current geopolitical environment, given the current increased number of attacks that we're seeing out, where are you investing more? Okay. And we're IDC. We have data in the middle of our name. So of course it's going to be a global study. We're going to look at it, and then we're going to pick on different regions. And here in the United States, this is where I get depressed. In the United States, we found 25%, give or take a percent, that were willing to say, no, we weren't going to increase any spend at all. Steady as she goes. Yet from my Asia Pacific brothers and sisters and our friends across the pond near your favorite vacation spot in Iceland and in the continent over there, we couldn't find anyone in that particular study that said, no, they were not willing to invest more. So what does that mean? What scares me is I think in the United States, we still have this notion from 1939 that the ponds to our east and to our west are going to defend us, that what happens in the world isn't going to affect us. But trust me, and you guys know this, and your audience knows this, there are threats that are coming across from geopolitical, you look at the nation state actors in Russia and Iran and North Korea and others. So that concerns me. So I still think that there's still an educational component. You still see too many organizations that say, I'm too small, or my industry isn't relevant. And sadly, I still think that there's an educational component that has to be addressed. That's one answer. B, here's one of the highlights of the very same study I was just dictating is, what's seen, at the top of the list, MDR was number 2, which makes me excited because I cover that a lot. So you're seeing investments in terms of managed detection and response. But you know what number 1 was? Now this is where I'm flipping the tables. You guys got to say what was number 1.
I would hope that it's staff and humans. That would be my vote.
Okay, you're close, Ryan. Brad, what do you think would be number 1?
I don't know. I'm afraid to even venture a guess at this point.
That's because you're still thinking about the calisthenics that we're going to do.
That's it. That's right. That's it.
Ryan, you're close. It was human related. It's education and training, and that is really cool. Here's why. I'm old enough, got enough gray hair. I've gone through economic cycles. What's the first thing that people cut when things become economically bad? Staff. What is it? Marketing and training. You know what I'm saying? We can always do that later. Not now. We're seeing firms that are saying no, and part of that's what we talked about before, right? They're seeing their cybersecurity practitioners being stolen off by other organizations. But also, we've all heard the term human firewall. You won't see that in my taxonomy, but that human firewall, how important people are in terms of stopping threats, how identity and credentials are so often, pilfered due to poor hygiene on the behalf of people that are actually dealing with technology. So that was exciting to see that, because that's a low cost, high return proposition, I would argue. So I'm glad to see MDR, because MDR I get excited about. It's the closest thing I can come to a magic bullet, because when you utilize magic, maybe we'll rename it, managed detection and response. When you think about that 24/7, 365 coverage that you get from the MSSP or the MDR provider, when you think about the threat hunting that they do, when you think about just being able to turn to a partner who's they're in the game, that's their core competence. And something, you don't necessarily need a whole lot of infrastructure. I remember interviewing a firm as part of our IDC does what we call marketscapes. It's similar to Waves or Magic Quadrants. And I interviewed a firm in Southeast Asia a year ago that was that their security stack consisted of a virtual CISO for 20 hours a week, and they had EDR. And you know something? They were able to consume MDR. That's what I really like about MDR is you don't need a huge technology stack because the IP and the technology is what? It's on the MSSP provider. Oftentimes wrapped around an XDR platform or their own IP. So I get excited about MDR because it's a way to quickly elevate maturity.
Yep. See, and I think again, you know our spin on this, right? From our show's point of view, software is not going to solve the problem, and there's just so much breadth and complexity that a million independent individual end user organizations are not going to bat 1,000, right? They're probably not going to solve it all on their own, but standardization and the proliferation of best practice through these logical points of aggregation of service providers, that seems like a way that we can actually apply leverage to this problem and get ahead. End users, they're starting to see the need, and like you said, it's dinner time conversation, but we're not expecting every single end user to be 100% skilled at 100% of the taxonomy. That would be unreasonable. But a service provider, hey, you should probably be able to step up and do that. So I think that is vital for our way forward. No, so Craig, you give us a lot of very good and tactical information, and obviously everybody's going to be looking for additional details behind your studies and all of this. Where's a good place for people to find Craig Robinson out there in the world if they've got follow-up questions, want to get a copy of the taxonomy, et cetera? Where's a good place to find you?
Find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place, or you can get a hold of me through idc.com. Either way, I don't hide under rocks too often, so I pop out every now and then, get a little sunshine on me.
Absolutely true. Well, before we let you go, and everybody's going to be tracking you down, we always like to get to know our guests a little bit better because this is an industry of birds of a feather, right? We tend to find very common ground. So in a segment that we like to put together, we call We Speak Geek. In this segment, we like to hear from you. What is it about you and your world where you know so much about something that other people go, wow, you really know stuff about that? Where do you speak geek, Craig?
So I hide the Star Trek Enterprise behind me, so it kind of clues you in on my affinity for space. And sadly, it seems like space is an area where we have to be concerned about for cybersecurity as well. But that's, again, a completely different topic and discussion. But, I got a funny little story I like to tell people. When I was much younger, I think I was probably 9 or 10 years old, I had this affinity for space travel. And I thought, it would be really cool if I could be like the first kid in space. So I literally wrote a letter. Remember letters, everyone? I think it was handwritten.
Postage stamps and everything.
Yeah, totally. And sent it to NASA, saying, hey, I want to be one of the first kids in space, and I'm willing to train at home or wherever you want me to. And I was flexible, hybrid work. One of the first hybrid work situations. And here's the cool part. And I don't know if you could ever do that today. So everyone's going to go talk to their kids at home and say, try this. NASA literally sent me back, 5 or 6 pictures of astronauts and and space vehicles. And some of them were autographed and with a nice little note saying, thank you, we'll essentially keep you on file for it. But I just thought that human touch, so often you guys talk about that human touch and how important it is, for MSSPs to be able to provide that. I just thought, for a government bureaucracy to be able to take the time and do something like that, and I don't care if it was Photoshop, if they do this all the time or not. I just thought that was kind of cool, for a stupid 10-year-old kid to get something back.
That's absolutely amazing. That's awesome that they did that. Did you maybe get a chance to go to space camp, perhaps even and try something like that? I know, like my first ride on like the centrifuge simulator going around, and so I'd be out. Like that would be like I know I'm not suited to be an astronaut, but what about you? Did you go to space camp, or how far did you get in your aspirations?
Here's how far I got about 10 years ago. So obviously I'm not a 10-year-old kid anymore. I went to Roswell, New Mexico on the way to Colorado, and I went to the UFO museum. And I paid, I don't know, this stupid $5 or $10 to get in with my family. And they actually had a UFO sort of scenario. I don't know if anyone in your audience or you guys have been there before. And I hate to say this because God bless you, Roswell, New Mexico, but it was so cheesy. They just had these characters at the end that maybe your junior high, middle school sort of team puts up. But then they'd say they had like this countdown to where they would have actual animation. And I think like the UFO space alien kind of like raised his arm up. And my family was just kind of looking over me like, because I was fascinated by it. I'm like, wow. And they're going, Dad. Can we disown you now?
Well, yeah, see, we have all been there in that position with our own kids where we realize that they realize that we're not cool, right?
Yeah.
Like they got it a long time ago, but when we get that they get it, that's a hard day out there in the world. But the good news is, and I'm sure you've seen these headlines, they've just announced the latest crew of 4 who will go up and circle the moon and pinpoint the location for ideally a 2024 or 5 trip back to actually land on the moon again. So there's hope in a space world that we haven't had for a couple of decades.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, that's true.
It's so good. We're so late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
we're looking for people to go to Mars too. So you could still be you could be the first to do that perhaps. But at the very least, if not actual space, you spend plenty of time in cyberspace, as we all have. So there's something to be said for that.
You learned with Iceland, didn't you?
Well, one or two things, but I think that's it. Unfortunately, we're going to have to, I would love to talk more about this because this is a lot of fun, but we have run out of time, so we're going to wrap up here. That's going to do it for the first half of our show, but please everyone return for the second half of our episode featuring our security news and trends topic of the week, the biggest zero trust architecture gaps that you need to fill. That plus our InfoSec News Rundown and our Dear Cyber for Hire Advice column segment, all coming up. So we'll see you in a moment on the other side.